Woman yields back, and now I recognize Congresswoman Dingell for her 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky, and thank you for holding this hearing, and to all of you that are testifying today. As a member who represents a Big Ten school in the University of Michigan, go Blue, and a Mid-American Conference school in Eastern Michigan University, as well as being a graduate of Georgetown University, this is a subject I have deep interest in and have already been spending a lot of time talking to coaches, athletes, and university administrators. And I'm really pleased to see the bipartisan attention on this issue and that the committee is taking the time to dig into the topic and examine all the different ways to support our student athletes. A crucial part of this conversation has been ensuring that student athletes are able to achieve both their educational and their personal goals. Many of you have suggested that student athletes are students first and foremost. In contrast, Mr. Huma, in your testimony, you suggest that some student athletes have been pushed to pursue less rigorous subjects or majors in order to devote more time to their sport, which would be anti-ethical to that goal, anti-ethical to that goal. Long-term educational attainment is inextricably linked to our conversation about a student and athlete's ability to monetize their name, image, or likeness. Dr. Livingston, as a university president and former college athlete, how can a federal NIL framework or other policies being considered today ensure that students are not facing a trade-off between their participation in collegiate athletics, monetization of NIL, and their educational attainment, which for many has long-term financial ramifications for these athletes beyond their post-secondary years? Do you have recommendations for specific policies that Congress or other authorities should implement to protect college athletes' education goals?
Now, I really appreciate that question, Congresswoman, and I think one of the points I made is that any national legislation on NIL has to make sure that the student portion of the student-athlete's experience remains the highest priority for them. We know, as we've said, 98% of these student-athletes will never have a professional contract. Many of them, their NIL will be less valuable after they graduate, and so it's very, very important that they get an education. So I think we have to continue to ensure that there are requirements for attendance in college, to progress towards a degree, that we encourage and incentivize them to be successful and to get a college degree. So I think any federal legislation needs to continue to make that a high priority. I think it's why an employment model becomes more challenging because once someone's an employee of the university, the question becomes, is your highest priority for that individual as an employee or as probably potentially a part-time student rather than a full-time student. So I think any legislation has to ensure that the student portion of that individual's experience remains of the highest priority in the context of their ability to take advantage of their name, image, and likeness and continue to perform effectively as an athlete.
Thank you, Mr. Huma. I'm going to ask you to provide an answer to that for the record, but I'm down to 1 minute and 28 seconds, and I'm really worried about women's sports that doesn't often receive the same support, promotion, recognition, or attention that men's sports programs do. So, and Title IX requires equal opportunities for men and women in college athletics, and NIL presents a potential avenue to give women new opportunities at making money for the use of their likeness. So, Ms. McWilliams, in the time we have left, is there any concern that federal NIL legislation could exacerbate these inequalities, or are there benefits in which thoughtful NIL policy might help promote women's sports programs and bridge these disparities in treatment? What policies should we consider in crafting this NIL legislation?
Thank you. I think all the things that we discussed today in the responsibility that we have as leaders to protect Title IX, these student athletes, our missions and our goals are why we're in higher education and why we have athletics in the first place. I do agree that we are out of whack here. I mean, it's a sad day to be having this conversation, working in this industry and being an athlete, trying to figure out or having conversations that the NCAA hasn't done its job. I am the NCAA. I'm a member of the organization. And gender equity is extremely important to me. So as leaders, every one of us that walk in a room, we have a responsibility to make sure it doesn't get lost. Whatever policy that is, whatever conversation that is our responsibility as leaders and around this table to ensure those conversations don't get lost and overbeared by what we believe is the highest priority, is making sure that all these dollars are being made and student athletes are not benefited from it. We all should be benefiting, and we're benefactors for sports. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that Title IX never gets lost, that the conversations are real and honest, and that every woman and every student athlete has an opportunity to succeed, and policies are in place to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Yield back, Madam Chair, with more questions for the record.